Welcome, welcome, everybody. It's 11 a.m. here in sunny Central Florida. I hope your November 10th is as warm and balmy as ours is. With me today is Emily Wray, professor in the Media Communications College at Full Sail University. She's also the creator, author, and brain behind the RISE model for peer review and self-evaluation. If you haven't seen that before, risemodel.com. Check it out. She's also my very, very good friend, here to talk about one of my absolute favorite subjects in the world, me. Take it away, Emily.
Well, what a pleasure it is, Jason. He is a distinguished faculty member, might I add, at Full Sail University. Jason teaches a course called Gaming and Transmedia Storytelling. He shares his passion and expertise for storytelling as a consultant with many organizations, including World Upside Down.
Yeah, World Upside Down.
So, World Upside Down is a non-profit organization that is dedicated to bringing arts education around the globe in an affordable and accessible manner. Jason and I are fortunate enough to be presenting today on behalf of World Upside Down, and today's presentation was also developed as a part of the HP Life e-learning initiative to spark entrepreneurial thinking programs. Today's presentation was also brought to you by the New Media Consortium.
Don't you feel supported? What is that, like 90 people made this possible?
I know.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess we better get started with all these people paying attention. And speaking of which, it is really nice to look out in the audience and see all the people that we have with us. Some very familiar names, some old graduates, our student friends are here, and some faculty and a lot of people that we haven't met yet. I guess that's what we're doing right now. What would be a great way to stay in touch with these people that we're meeting today, Emily?
Well, a great way to stay in touch and just to connect generally over this topic, Jason, would be to join our private closed Facebook group. So one of the goals that we had for today was to give life to this presentation, to the concepts and the techniques and the stories and the examples, far beyond the 2 hours that we were lucky enough to secure on your agenda. So what we've done is we have created a closed Facebook group to continue the conversation around brand storytelling. In the group, we have curated supporting resources, articles and videos, as well as several exercises to help guide your own exploration of this topic.
Do not be scared when you hear exercise. This has nothing to do with leg lifts or jogging. These are purely digital exercises, so the lazy out there should really enjoy this. When you're trying to log in to the tinyurl.com, make sure that you keep in mind it's case sensitive. Watch those upper and lower case letters. What you'll be doing is requesting entrance to the group, and almost immediately somebody's in there. Shannon Gillett, in fact, is in there. She's our social media listener for the day. And she'll give you access to that group so you can begin back channeling and even sharing some of your ideas while we talk. All right, I hope to see some people. Yeah, there's the link. Shannon's got the link, so it's a click away if you'd rather just click the link and ask for entrance to the group.
Today's presentation is also going to be recorded, and the archive will be made available to the members of our Facebook community, as well as anybody who has registered and attended for today's session.
Right. Everybody else will have to pay $19.95 to get a copy of this. I heard all of you laughing out there. You knew that was a joke. Couldn't charge that much. But well, maybe we could. Let's find out by jumping directly into square one, the basics. These are brand storytelling basics. And we're going to just kind of scratch the surface, because before we talk about anything too complex, before we dissect brand storytelling, we've got to examine this organism at a more basic level. So let's do that just by simply taking apart the concept of brand storytelling. Let's first look at the word brand. Now, that's a scary word if you hear people throwing it around, because they could throw it around for a million different reasons.
Yeah, Jason, I'd say that this is a term that's pretty widely used, but kind of unevenly understood. So, for the purposes of our discussion moving forward today, a brand is an identity. It is what people think of and associate with your company, with your product, or with your project. So it's the relationship that you have with your customers, your friends, your fans, your followers, and the relationship and opinion that they have of you.
Right. It really spans a huge spectrum of possible definitions. It could be anything from an individual that makes cupcakes out of their kitchen, all the way up to a huge multinational conglomerate, and anywhere in between. A brand doesn't have to be Coca-Cola, and it doesn't have to be an individual. It it's complex, but I don't want anybody to get scared. Stay with us. It's just pretty basic branding.
One of the things that I did want to mention for all the students who are joining us today, a lot of people equate a brand with simply a logo, which is a graphic representation of that identity. But a brand is really so much more than that. It's a lot more about the feelings and the actions and the individuals associated with that brand.
Right. Because taking a look at brand, you could get that assumption, but now we're going to add this other very important word to it. And this adds the dimension that Emily's talking about, this storytelling dimension. Storytelling also, it could be complex if you don't think about it all the time. Luckily, I do. And stories are absolutely everywhere. Stories are on TV, they're in the movies, they're in books, they're in magazines, they're in comic books. We've seen those for decades. But stories are also in our families, and they're also what we did today, and they're also what we think in our heads, and they're also what the people on the bus with us are thinking about. All of these different people and all of their different stories and their experiences and their problems that they overcome or try to overcome are stories. So as a storyteller, we're not looking at just Star Wars or just Little Red Riding Hood. We're looking at the stories that make up our everyday lives. And frankly, they're in almost every imaginable form. I really would challenge us to try and find a form that stories aren't in. Uh, Shadow puppet shows, water bubble shows, fountains that tell stories with the way that they go off and the music that accompanies them. These are some really obscure versions, but they're all examples of story. There are some basics, though, and without these basics, a story is not a story. And we'll talk more about this, but right now we're just talking the basic basics. A story has to have characters, setting, and plot. If you're missing one of those, you don't have a story. A character without plot is just a person. A setting without characters is just a place. You need all three of those elements for a very basic story. And also, a story usually has to have a beginning and a middle and an end of some sort. And we'll talk more about that beginning, middle, and end just a little bit later. As it stands right now, I would just like to hit this next button because it's exciting to see this all come together. When we take brand and storytelling and put them together, we get the characters and the setting and the actions or plot that make up your brand that tells the story of your brand. Whether you're Coca-Cola or the lady making cupcakes with her 3 children to take to school and to sell to all of the different PTA functions, no matter what size organization you're dealing with, there are multiple stories that make up your brand. And telling those stories to your potential customers are how you engage them and keep them and lock them in as longtime customers. There's also a misconception we'd like to clear up pretty early on. When we talk about your brand story, a lot of times people try to come up with a single story. And again, I'll point to Little Red Riding Hood. That simple story is not gonna cover the breadth and depth of a brand. There's a lot more to a brand than just a single storyline. And I'd like to use an analogy if I may. May I?
You may.
Okay, it's happening now, folks. I got permission. The World War II analogy is how we're going to describe the tapestry of threads that make up these big stories. World War II is a giant story. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And if I was a high school history teacher, I would tell that story from a certain perspective. I would start off by talking about the causes that led up to the beginning of the conflict in Europe. I would then talk about the problems in Asia and oil consumption, and eventually we'd work ourselves over to Pearl Harbor and the US entering the war, and so on, until we get all the way to the end with the Treaty of Versailles and eventually the forming of NATO, and I've got a nice little ending to the story of World War II from that general overview, that general history teacher look at the story. But we all know that the story of World War II is really made up of millions and millions and millions of other stories. Uh, just consider them all. There's the story of Mussolini's rise to power. That by itself is a story. Rommel's tanks. My grandfather getting on a ship and leaving Miami and going to the Pacific to fight. My grandmother who stayed behind and took care of the family and worked in a factory. All of these stories make up the tapestry of stories that is World War II. And Emily, there's also this other category, the fictional stories that make up World War II, because they're also a very big part of what we think about when we think about World War II. Some of those fictional threads, the movie Pearl Harbor, that was a very fictional movie. Boy, they took a lot of liberties there. HBO had a couple of great ones, right?
Yeah, Band of Brothers, and what was that other one?
Oh, Pacific.
Yes, the
Yeah,
Pacific.
and then one of my favorites, Bridge Over the River Kwai. All of these fictional stories still support the overall story of World War II. So while World War II might be a rather bloody affair, I would like you to try and equate that to a brand story. A brand story is a number of different stories, and we're going to talk about those different threads, and we're also going to talk about how you weave them into that tapestry we mentioned. So buckle up, everybody. If your desk chair has a seatbelt, it's time to click it. All right, here's what we're going to do next. We are going to take a closer look at brand storytelling. We talked about the basics, but we're going to take a little bit of a closer look now because I'm concerned that some people might be afraid of the concept. It's not something you can quickly check Wikipedia for and learn about, which makes it seem like it must be magical. So let's ask this question. Is brand storytelling new?
Oh no, Jason, it is not.
Okay. Answer completed. We've now demystified brand storytelling completely, and I'm sure you're all at ease. Brand storytelling might be a new term, it might be a new phrase, and it might start getting thrown around a lot because it sounds good. But the concepts behind brand storytelling have been around for a long time. Now, this updated version with the fancy new updated name, it includes some things that we didn't have before, and this includes our digital world and the social media platforms that we have access to. All of these and a whole slew of fancy new words make it so that brand storytelling actually is describing something that's been around, but describing this new iteration of it in a way that we can all start to take advantage of it. Stories are as old as time. Brands are pretty old. This concept of brand storytelling that's been around is now rebuilt thanks to the digital world that we live in. Now there are, and I said it before, there are a slew of fancy new words that can be added to our marketing lexicon. And we would like to talk about a few of them before we get too much further. So there's a few that we're going to bounce back and forth with. Emily, what jumps out at you here?
Super fan.
Yeah, superfan. Every brand has people that love it more than they probably should. There are Coca-Cola fans that have every bit of Coca-Cola memorabilia ever, a Coca-Cola tattoo, and guess what they had for breakfast? Not Pepsi, Coke, because they are super fans. They completely and totally buy into the brand that they're following. If you're working with a brand, you probably have some of these super fans, and considering them as part of your brand storytelling audience is very important. Consider a super fan of a brand like Zappos. Somebody that really loves the Zappos company and loves their shoes. They may even have a blog that's focused entirely on how much they love Zappos. If Zappos upsets them, they're going to say something to their audience, and it's going to influence how that brand reacts and acts. Most of these terms up here are just pointing at certain types of people that have a voice that didn't have a voice before. And what's giving them that voice? Social media and the digital platforms that we have access to today. All right, we are now kicking off the very first step in our workshop. We've got a workshop that's going to occur concurrent with what we're talking about. But for those of you that are here in the live studio audience, you're at home, you're at work, taking some time off to be with us, you're not going to complete these exercises right now. You're going to think about them, and you're going to brainstorm them, and you're going to consider the ways that you're going to work with them. But these exercises are for tonight, and for tomorrow, and for this weekend. That's why this Facebook group is such a great place to come together and share your ideas. You don't have to post something today to get feedback on it. You could post it next week or get feedback on it. You could do it in 2 weeks. So you find a time when you can plug in, and your community is going to be there waiting for you to help work on the ideas that you have and bring your brand story ideas to life. Well, all of that just so I could explain step one. What are they doing in step one, Emily?
Well, basically, we do have a pretty diverse audience here with us today. As I mentioned before, just to acknowledge that we have students, we have teachers, we have entrepreneurs, we have established business owners here with us today. And so, we'll be talking about these big ideas and broad terms, and each of you will need to connect to this information in a different way.
Right.
So within the Facebook group, we'd like for you to identify, what is your take on brand storytelling? How are you trying to leverage this? Is it for your personal brand? Is it for your classroom? Is it for a project that you are trying to get off the ground? Is it for the new small business that you've been working on? So if you do have a real idea or a scenario, then that would be one that we could workshop in the Facebook group. So, if you don't, and you're kind of just here to get some, basic familiarity with the concept of brand storytelling, then perhaps you could suppose a hypothetical situation to work through these various exercises with.
Right. So basically, some of you already have a client. You can't see it, but I'm holding up little air quotes. You either already have a real client that is you or a group that you're a part of, or we're asking you to go pick one. Choose a hypothetical client. It could be a nonprofit organization in your area. It could be a big brand that you see commercials for during the Super Bowl. It doesn't matter. The important thing is to give yourself a client that you can work with on the exercises that we're going to propose as we go throughout our time today. So, with that being said, hopefully you're considering who your client, air quotes again, who your client is going to be. And also, by now, hopefully you've joined us at our Facebook group and you've tried to gain entrance to it. And off we go to our very next section.